All right, thank you. This is not the talk you're expecting. Maybe that is.
1 more minute.
All right, good.
Tired with 2 days of technology. Lots of info. Drinking from firehouse.
All right, welcome to the last talk of the day, I think. Nice little lightweight talk on encryption. It's a very interesting time to be talking about this stuff. If you're not paying attention, today Apple gave the middle finger to the FBI. And it's unclear whether that's going to be their stated position, but for a long time, it's unclear whether their position could be anything but that moving forward. The particular phones in question are an iPhone 5C, and there are theories that it can be modified to extract the details that the FBI are looking for, basically to turn off the delays and the retry counts and things like that. But as far as the phones moving forward, it's not clear whether Apple even has the capability to do that with the secure data storage areas. So I mean, I originally started talking about this stuff a couple years ago when I sensed that there was sort of a disconnect between the amount of trust developers put into encryption and the reality. And at the time, I mean, I lived through the first crypto wars back in the day, and we kind of stopped thinking about it, right? We kind of thought, okay, well, everybody's using crypto now. But I was feeling the drum beats of the government coming back to crypto again. But that wasn't really my stated goal. My goal was to get people to understand that, it doesn't matter how well something is designed, if it's implemented in a poor way, then you can't put your trust in it. And so we were seeing things like what eventually became the Heartbleed bug and other ones showing up. And so I just really wanted to talk about code quality and what we put trust in and things like that. And I always sort of ended with like, hey, look, I'm not a crazy person. I'm not a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. I'm not anti-government. But I think they're coming for our crypto. And in the last couple of years, that's clearly been the case, right? They have these stated positions. And so I want to present what is happening, not from any sort of particular agenda or anything, but just so people are aware, because again, the trust that we put into cryptography, if it is actively being undermined by the government, then we can't really put that kind of trust in it. So just to help people be aware of what's going on. All right, so obviously the title is Encryption, Why It Matters. Normally this is a longer talk. I've got a history session that begins it. It's fascinating. Like, we think of this as a very new thing, but it actually goes back to Spartans and was widely used during the Renaissance between nation states that were exchanging letters with each other. And you get into the U.S. Revolution and Civil War, even leading up, when Mary Queen of Scots was being held by Elizabeth. She was using Cookbook to communicate with people and committed treason and was detected as having committed treason. And so, I mean, crypto has been around for a long time, up all the way even to the Enigma systems that were used during World War II were broken by Polish researchers before the war, and their approaches for breaking it were shared with the English. Obviously, the Germans expanded them and made them more complicated, so Bletchley Park had to work harder to try to re-break them, and then Turing eventually created his computers and Tommy Flowers to create general-purpose computers. So that's where sort of the modern era of cryptography and cryptanalysis started. But it's become crucial to us these days
Okay.
as we're building
Accessibility matters.
online
But what
systems
does
with
it take
distributed
to do
notions
something
of
like
trust.
this, right? That's another thing
We're
that we want
interacting
to
with
address,
people,
right?
we're sharing credit
So
card
as you go
details
through this,
online, we're
the patterns
entering
of deployment
information, medical
and
data
a tool
for
that enables
interacting
those
with our
patterns
insurance
to
companies.
make those
So
deployments,
having a
understand
good,
what the
strong
power of that kind of a thing
cryptographic
is, and how
infrastructure
flexible
is crucial to what
a tool should
we're
be
about these days.
to be able to
So this
meet
is
those
not
kind
going to
of
be any kind
requirements.
of graduate
That's the
level
topic for
cryptography
today, right?
course. To really understand this stuff requires an understanding of
it talks
the
about
math,
world-class
which
paths.
is beyond what we're going to be able to have time to
We'll
do.
adapt
But more than
first
anything,
and get
I
them.
want you to be aware of the environment. I want you to be
So
aware
what
of some of
makes
the
up
basic
a
ideas
world-class
and
path?
leave sort of a trail for you to go dig deeper if you want to.
You all know what a path
And
is?
I've got some actually reasonably accessible
Platform as a
books
service.
on the math
What
behind
is
some of these
platform as a
things as
service?
well.
So for those
So
people who don't know,
cryptography is what we would call a security feature,
who heard
right?
platform
It
as a
is
service for the
a
first
set of
time?
tools that allows us to engender
At least one
secrecy
person. So
in a system
let's cover that,
if it's
right?
done right, if it's
Think about
configured right, if it's not
infrastructure
poorly
as a
implemented
service.
and there are no backdoors
It's a
in it.
cloud-based model, right?
So
it's running
it's
on
not
cloud,
a secure system
and
though.
you
Right?
have
That
some other
requires
term
a
called
lot
software as a
more
service. Even that's a cloud-based
management of
model. It's running on
identity and
cloud.
trust and
Everything
authentication and having authorization
is
models
becoming
and
as a service these days.
tying it
And
into
when you
your
say as
software
a
build
service,
process.
it
We talked a lot about
implies
these things
running somewhere on
in the
cloud.
web security talk the other
Right?
day.
What does
So
that mean?
I just want to dispel the notion that just using
Where
security,
you can
using
go and
encryption gives you a secure
your
system.
environment
It is a
whenever you
tool
want.
that can help,
But if you
but
think
it is
about
not
infrastructure as a service,
enough.
are there any
And
examples that you
encryption
can
isn't
quote?
even a single thing, right? It's a set of
AWS
primitives
EC2,
that
right?
you tie together
OpenStack.
to
It should
solve
be
certain
running on a
problems.
public
And
cloud, or it could
needing
be
to encrypt
running in
lots
your
of
own data
information
center.
very
But it
quickly
has
is
a
a very
self-provisioning
different scenario
capability. Whenever
than wanting to
a user
encrypt,
wants
say,
it, they
the
can go and
keystrokes of somebody
ask
using a
for
Bluetooth keyboard where there's not a lot of
environment,
information
and that environment is provisioned
we
for
don't
you,
want to block on it. We don't want to sort of wait until there's enough data
Now,
there.
when it comes
So
to
we're going to use a
EC2,
different
the
policy
Amazon
in that
EC2,
scenario than
what do you
something that
get
needs to encrypt a phone conversation as it's happening.
What are you getting when you
So the
ask for
primitives that we have available to us,
a server, which is a virtual
actually
machine
we already
running on
know
the
how to
cloud,
do
right?
perfect
What does that
encryption,
virtual machine mean?
right?
You're getting
This is
some
a
amount of
one-time
compute,
pad is a
some
scenario
amount
that
of
is information
memory,
theoretically
some
secure.
amount of
It
networking,
provides
all
the complete perfect secrecy.
virtual
It
machine,
is
and that's
not
what you're getting.
at all
What do you do?
able to be
You
thwarted
install
by brute force attacks.
middleware,
So
and then
if you want to go to another talk, right,
that's
maybe
infrastructure
take
as
the
a
next
service, right?
hour.
When you think
Well,
about
obviously that's
software
not
as a
enough, right?
service, what are you
This is
getting?
not a real solution for
What is
most
an
people.
example of software as a service?
While all of this is true, the problem is it requires perfectly random keys. And what's the problem with that?
Right. Salesforce is a good example when it
We don't really know how to generate perfectly random things on commodity hardware, right? We can look at atomic
into
decay and environmental factors and mix in background noise and the timing of somebody
Gmail,
moving the
Google
mouse.
Docs.
And so the
These
things
are
that we can
simple
do to
software
increase
services.
the
So as a
randomness
service
available to
models,
us.
they are running on the cloud as well.
But if it
right?
requires
But what's the
perfectly
difference?
random keys,
You're
that's
getting
going
a
to be
complete
somewhat more
full-fledged
difficult.
application.
Now, that being said, let's say
Maybe
you
can
do come
tweak
up with a perfectly
colors,
random
change
key.
the patterns on how it works,
What's
but
the next
it's a
problem?
complete software. And think about the audience here. The audience
It's right
is
there in the
end
name.
user on the
One time.
in case of software
You
service.
cannot reuse
Can
the
you
key.
give
So whatever difficulty that you
spouse,
go into
if
to
they are
generate
not
that
in
random
IT,
key, you have to do every single time you want to do this.
AWS EC2 and
The
Azure
final
EC2?
thing that makes this completely impractical for
No,
anything
right? So
other
it's
than
meant for
sort of
different
very
audience.
small
Who
messages
is the audience there? For AWS EC2?
that the keys have to be as long as the input. So you
Operations
need
folks
that much
who have to
randomness
install
for
middleware
a
before
very,
your
very
applications can run.
long file.
You may say,
That's
I'm a
going to be
developer, I
difficult.
use EC2, that's
The
true,
government
but
used to
what's the
pay
role you're playing?
Rand Corporation
What's the
to
cap
produce
you're
like
wearing there?
1,000-page books of
Operations,
truly
because you
random
are
numbers,
installed
or at least
middleware
as truly as
before
we
you can
could.
actually run your code.
But those aren't generally
Comes to
available
platform.
for us. So
What
this is
is-
not really a solution.
Who is the audience?
However, we don't have to look that much further than our
for me?
lowly friend, the XOR operation, to find an example of how something like this might work. So
Right.
if you'll recall, A XOR B,
To
so 0
write some
XOR 0
code,
is 0,
not
0
to
XOR 1 is 1, 1 XOR 0 is 1, 1 XOR 1 is
inspired
0.
by the ability
Why
to
is
write
this
code,
an interesting
right? So,
primitive
as long
for thinking about
code,
cryptographic systems?
and as long as you
If
can
we think
deploy the
of
code,
A as a bit of the plain text,
that's
B
what
as a bit
matters
of the
to you,
key,
right? So,
and then the output as a bit of ciphertext.
which is not just a VM,
Why is this
but
surprisingly
everything
useful?
that is needed to run my application, right?
Yeah, so if you
kind
see
of a
in the ciphertext
thing
that
that
it's
you
a
get
0,
is
you know that they're not
what
the same,
is enabled
but
by
you
platform
don't
as a service.
know whether
What does
they're
platform as a
both
service
zeros
give
or
you?
they're both ones.
A
And so we've
complete
sort of reduced this to
stack of
a
an
50-50 chance.
environment
And if
where
you have a
your
50-50
application
chance for
can
every
be deployed
bit
in
that's
run.
involved, That's not going to work, right?
That's the
So
answer to what platform.
at its heart,
is that a
math
same understanding
works,
that
right?
everyone
Math
has
is hard. Bruce Schneier
Yes.
says trust the
Right.
math. We can make things
So
work
when it comes to platform,
in a fairly simple way if we have
for past
sort
2
of good
days we have been
randomness and
hit with one
entropy
thing.
in the key
Containers,
space.
containers, Docker,
But the
containers,
trick
Docker,
is now
right?
how to build a
Every
system that actually works
this room
at
at least,
performance for various size
Docker containers. So I don't want to
inputs,
bang you again
various
with the same
scenarios
exact
of
things,
usage.
simply
But the
thinking
first
about it, right?
sort of
are
basic
trying to run
primitive
your
that we can
application
build on this idea
a
is that of a stream
platform
cipher.
as a
We
service
have
kind of
a set
model,
of bits coming in for the
Application is
encryption. We have a set of bits of keys coming in, and we put XOR or the mod 2
the other
operator
person
in the middle.
is not even known
Then effectively we have
within
the
your
capacity to
data
generate
center.
encrypted bits that we could send
Could
across
be
the
some
wire.
other
And if
developer
we have the
or some other
same
individual
bits on
within
the other side, we could just XOR them
their application
again,
side with your application,
and we'd
right?
be in
How do you
good
run
shape.
that? In today's environment,
So what's the problem
you are
here?
running virtual machine. Right?
We
Your
got to share the
application has a
key. The
virtual
key's
machine.
got to be random.
Somebody
The
else's
key's got to be as
application
long as
also
the
has their own
input.
virtual
Same
machine,
things
and these
that we
virtual
saw with the
machines are
one-time
spinning
path.
up, and
Now that
those
doesn't
virtual
mean it's
machines are
impossible.
actually
We've
running these
had
applications
several
code.
stream ciphers
Is
that
that
have
true?
been designed. We have some
Now,
that
in case
remain
of platform
not
as a
known to
service,
be
that's
compromised or
replaced by
compromisable,
containers. And
but
there are
most
reasons
of
for
the ones that we
what?
have used have
How long
been
is it for a
deprecated.
VM to spin up?
Most recently, the RC4 one, it leaks details
minutes.
about the key space in the first
At,
several bytes.
at a minimum,
And
it takes a few
so
minutes.
we basically want to stop
Even if you
using it
automate
before we know
everything
that
in
it's been
terms of
compromised, because
middleware
then
installation, your
somebody else
application
might know that it
installation,
also has
everything,
been compromised.
still it takes
But
a
the
few
nice
minutes to
thing
spin up.
about this is that
Is that
encryption
true?
and decryption
Now,
are the same thing,
running
right? It's just
scale.
reversing the operation of an XOR. That's pretty
Let's
straightforward.
say
So as far
you
as
are
implementation, electronics, cost, computation, this is a pretty straightforward approach.
have
So
the
there's
3,
some
4,
things
5
that we
minutes
like about it,
for your
but
customers to
because
wait
of
while they are
the
pressing
difficulties,
buttons for those containers to spin
this
up.
is not
You don't, right? So
easy to build in a distributed kind of way.
you need
Now, there
some
have been several
kind of an
stream ciphers
environment
that are still
that
in
can
use.
spin up in
We just sort of
seconds
assume that
or
they're basically broken.
less than a
The
second
A5 stream cipher is
instead
used
of
in the GSM
spinning up
phone
in
system.
minutes,
And when it
right?
was being designed,
That's the reason why
the
people are
British,
going
who are
towards
very
containers,
interested in being able
right?
to crack these things, were
Now,
like, no, we do not
containers
want to
is
give
not a
people
new
strong
thing.
encryption. And the Germans, who
Containers
shared a
has
border with Eastern Europe,
been
were like,
there
yes, we
for
want
many years
good
now.
encryption. We don't want
Docker
somebody just
is not the
listening to the
beginning
phone
of containers.
signals and being able to easily
What
decrypt them.
makes up
So they came
containers?
to a compromise
It
that
uses
had some
technologies
protection
which
for a
are
while, but
on
basically the
Linux today,
A5,
and
A51
probably they'll
stream
come up in
ciphers that
Windows at
are
some point
used,
of
we
time, very
mostly consider broken,
very
right?
soon,
That's why
right?
Tony Soprano doesn't talk on
What
the phone.
technologies are those?
Now,
Controls the amount of
block ciphers are sort
container
of
runs
a
process,
different
as
kind of
simple as that.
primitive
Your
where we
application
can
runs as a
imagine
process
some kind
on
of
a box,
bit
right?
length,
And
and then we can do multiple
needs to
bits at a
run
time. We can encrypt a block at a time.
the same
And
box.
in its primitive form,
Right.
that makes sense, right?
So
We
what
have some
does
number of bits, we have a
container
key size, we do an encryption
without
for the entire
exceeding
block. If
the
there
limits
are
that
not
are
enough bits, then we'll come up with
posted
some
on
kind of
that
padding
process?
strategy,
So it
and
can
we're good.
only consume X amount
Where
of
it
CPU.
starts to get a little
It can only
difficult
consume
is in
X amount
how do
of
we
memory.
manage
It
multiple
can
blocks.
only consume X amount
So we
of
have a
disk
series
space.
of modes:
Some
electronic
resources
cookbook,
that
Cipher
are
block
assigned to
chaining,
that
Cipher
process,
feedback
it
mode,
should not
output
cross.
feedback
Who
mode,
ensures that?
counter mode.
Right?
And they all have different
That comes
properties.
from
And
a Linux
the first one we're going to talk about
control
is
groups.
electronic cookbook,
Linux
and it
control
has the
groups
property of you
enables
should
that.
never use it, right? It
What
sounds
else do you
good
need?
on paper,
Your
but it's got
process
some problems. So
requires
in
some
this case,
resources.
every
Those
block
are
is
the
independently
resources
encrypted and
of your
decrypted.
process.
That
Some other
induces some
process running
cool
on the same box
properties
cannot
in
come
our
in and
encryption
tamper
system,
the files
such
that belong
as
to you. Is that right? So your process needs to
parallelizable,
run in a secured
right?
environment.
There's no connection between the blocks, so I
What
can,
gives
you do this, you do that.
AC Linux.
I can do it together in the other way,
And then
and performance is pretty good. If we have less than the number of bits
your
per block, we'll just pad it. But
some level
one of the other nice things from a communication perspective is if there is an error, then we only have to resend that one block or recalculate the one block. Whereas some of the other ones, the blocks are linked together, and an error would end up having to
kind of things.
resend several blocks.
Right? You don't.
So
want
the
to bother
basic
about
idea
those
here
things.
is that we have a key
So
that's
your
coming in,
process
we have our
thinks that
plain
I'm
text
the king
block,
on this box.
we generate a cipher
And other
text
person's
block.
process, which is running
Each
on the
one
same
is done
box,
independently.
also thinks that I'm the
Then
king on this box.
the decryption
How do
is
you
just
enable that?
going the other way,
That comes
right?
from namespaces.
So ciphertext gets fed
Right.
through the
All these
engine
technologies
with a key, and
evolved
we
over a
produce our
period
plain
of
text.
time, and they have been
So
there
good performance,
on
easy to
Linux
do,
for
easy to
some
implement, easy to imagine.
And there are
The
several container
downside
technologies
is
available
you
in the
can't
industry,
detect
right?
block pre-ordering.
But
So if I
years
have
back,
these blocks being done in parallel and I
came up with
accidentally
a
or
packaging
intentionally
format.
swap these blocks,
right?
then you don't necessarily know where those errors happen. This can be a problem, and there are certain kinds of attacks where you can imagine a wire transfer is being done, and I swap the to and from of the bank accounts. And if I have some way of intercepting the key and generating blocks, I can substitute them in, and you wouldn't notice that. So block reordering, block substitutions are difficult or impossible to detect. But the real issue is it's entirely deterministic. The same block with the same key will generate the same ciphertext every single time. And you have to look no further than the infamous penguin image to see what that does, right? So we have pixels, white, gray, 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 white, gray, 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 gray. The same pixels are generated, the same encrypted pixels are generated from the same unencrypted pixels. And so you can actually see the structure of what you're encrypting in the encrypted form, which is generally not good. So this helps us understand that some of the basic principles that make a crypto system work are, does it induce sufficient confusion in the sense that looking at the ciphertext, I can't get back to the plain text? And does it have sufficient diffusion in the sense that a single bit difference in the input space generates a radically different output space? Then there's no discernible connection. I can't use linear algebra to do some simple equations to reverse some of these things. So what we want is this image to generate a completely chaotic white noise kind of image, and a single bit difference to generate a completely different noise generation. So a system that has good confusion and good diffusion is a useful crypto system. So we can solve some of this problem by chaining the blocks together. And so we will use something called an initialization vector to kind of pick a random starting point. And this is a difficult thing to wrap your head around. It took me a long time to be convinced this was not something that needed to be protected like the key. And it largely comes down to this is helping with the diffusion characteristics, not the confusion characteristics. The key still drives the confusion characteristics for most of these. So we have the initialization vector that gives us random starting points, and then each block is XORed with the next block and then encrypted. So here we have the initialization vector coming in as our starting point. We XOR the plaintext, we run it through our encryption engine, we generate ciphertext, and that's fed into the next stage. So this is increasing the confusion and the diffusion in the system. We have chained operations here that reduce the determinism in our output, but we've also introduced kind of a negative in this approach, which is what? Sorry? Well, it needs to be random, right? And mostly we're just trying to make it so that it's harder to guess where things can go deterministically, right? You need to be careful. A lot of people will just generate an initialization vector and put it in the code and just reuse the same one over and over again. That's missing the point. But we've lost the parallelizability, right? Because we're now feeding one output into the next input. And so from a performance perspective, that kind of sucks. That being said, Cipher block chaining has been pretty widely used for a long time because it has reasonably good operational characteristics. It's reasonably easy to implement. There are some cases where it has caused problems. We'll talk a little bit about the POODLE attack in a little bit. And that's an issue through the combination of the fact that the SSL3 protocol does not specify what the padding should be. So if the final block is not of the same block size, you need padding in there. But by reordering the blocks and doing some other mischief, you end up being able to generate with a 1 in 256 chance the aspects of the plaintext. And so you just keep on doing this over and over again, and you can recover things like HTTP cookies and session keys and whatnot. So fundamentally, SSL3 is broken because of this combination of characteristics. And so you need to make sure that if you can specify that you only talk to TLS 1.2 systems. Now that has a negative impact because not all browsers support TLS 1.2, so there may be a business trade-off, like what is our risk versus what do we do by pissing off our customers and telling them they need to update their browsers. So CBC has been pretty widely used. The reverse process, we take the ciphertext, reverse it through the key, use the initialization vector, so we need to transfer that to the receiver. It's randomly generated, but it just is sent with the message. and then we can reverse the process. Each input block feeds the
interprogram, right?
XOR of the reverse of the other process.
An instantiation gets you the container.
It's not a secondary key, it's a random
Clear?
starting point, right? So
So
you do need it on the other end,
Red Hat
but
made a decision
it's a question
we are
of,
going to
can I sort of
run
brute
Docker
force these
containers
things? Do I leak
natively
details?
in Red Hat Enterprise Linux.
You
have
can kind of think of it
built
like salting password, right? If you don't have the salt in the
system
password,
environments
then I can
that
just
support
blow
Docker.
through all the possible
One is
combinations
RHEL
for
7, which is the
simple
newest
hashing.
version of RHEL.
But with the
now it is
salt in there,
7.x,
you have to do
7.2
that much more
right
work
now, right?
to do the same thing. So it kind of serves that purpose
Native.
in
There is
making
another
it harder to brute
RHEL,
force
which is
the direct attack on the protocol.
the size of RHEL. It has own
All right,
libraries.
so
that
works pretty well for like internet traffic historically.
Both
but
these host
let's say
operating
that
systems would support
you
Docker
want
containers
to
natively. You don't have to
generate a stream cipher, because we have a good capacity to generate confusion now, right? So we can generate a lot of randomness in the bits. The output feedback mode allows us to use a block cipher to generate the bits for the stream cipher. So it now becomes much easier to say, I've got a 1 megabyte file I want to send, I need a megabit of good random data, use the output feedback mode to generate the key stream, and then the encryption just becomes a stream cipher under the hood. So this is kind of a cool way to take what we've learned in the block cipher world and then apply it to a stream cipher implementation. And because of the way it's designed, the key stream can be generated beforehand. I don't have to do that as I'm encrypting stuff. So that's a speed up that you can do before you actually send the message. You can also then have pre-computed keys shared through couriers and things like that too if you want. But the point is, here, the initialization vector and the key are used to generate bits. This process up here can be pre-computed, so as long as I'm going through these bits down here, I've got sufficient key bits to pull off. So the key stream can be pre-generated. The reverse process now looks exactly like the encryption process. We're just swapping the plain text and the ciphertext, because with stream ciphers, this is now an easily reversible process.
Was started based on
now, the cipher feedback mode is useful because we feed the ciphertext back into the key stream process,
or any technology
the key stream generation process. Now, this reduces our capacity to pre-compute the streams, obviously, but it's useful for when you have sort of like small bursty amounts of data, like Bluetooth keys being pressed. Again, we want high entropy in the bytes that are sending, because if I can just attack that, then I don't need to attack your crypto, because I'll just intercept the password that you're typing, right? So there are reasons why you would use cipher feedback mode, but the point is, there's no single kind of encryption. You're applying certain primitives into a system to solve a specific problem. So somebody who is designing your crypto solution needs to understand what they're doing and why, not just because I read something on Stack Overflow and this is what it looked like you do, right? You need to understand what your cipher suite is, what your key length is, what your block mode is, what your hashing algorithm is, and whether any of those things have been deemed to have been compromised.
You can
all right, so counter mode is an attempt to move beyond this and apply some of the things that we learned in output feedback mode to give us back parallelizability. So we're going to use the block cipher mode to generate the key stream. We're going to use an initialization vector whose size is less than the number of the block size, and then the remaining bits will be used to uniquely identify the initialization vector and a nonce, effectively, for each block. So now I have a predictive way of associating this with each block, so I don't need to chain things anymore, and I get back the parallelizability, the streamability, and I'm still generating key streams that can be used to treat the underlying encryption as a stream cipher. So it's called counter mode because usually people just say, okay, here's the initialization vector. I'm going to save these number of bits. So the first one will be the nonce beginning part 00000, and the next one will be the nonce beginning bit 00001. And so we're counting the individual blocks. Now there are limits to like how much data you can do before you're going to recycle, but for most uses
Then
and most
containers
sessions and things like that, this is a very
is a
high
full-fledged
performance and flexible
even
mode.
virtual
So
machine that
we're
shares
now at the
infrastructure
point where
is
we
a
have
full-fledged operating system.
parallelizability back, good
Now you're
confusion,
talking
good
about containers.
diffusion, and the ability to
All
seek
the
into
libraries who
streams,
provide security.
and
Right?
we're pretty happy. So now we have
You are
tools
running
that give us encryption, but they don't
access
actually
that
solve the
from
problem of
outside. Like I type in
did
a
somebody
URL
meet in the
to land
middle
upon a container.
and
Who does that,
intercept
right?
and lie to me,
These
right?
checks
Do I
were-
know that the message has been messed with in the middle? Do I know that it came from the person I'm
Then-
expecting it to come from?
Now,
And the answer is here, no,
how many
we
people-
do not know that. So modern
Yeah.
encryption systems are moving
No, but-
toward the ability
Right?
to
That's the
solve these other
for
problems. And so we have,
finding your Docker images.
you have a question?
Now, if you want to run a Docker image for your favorite technology, whatever, Node.js, let's say.
Well, each block
If you go
is
and type
individually
Node.js
identified, so you'd
on
be able
Docker Hub,
to
how many images? Hundreds?
check the
one
results
you
of the
believe and
individual
use?
block.
How do
Right?
you
If
know
you
there
know
are no
the
security
IV and you
vulnerabilities?
know the block number and you know the key,
Right?
you could regenerate it
So,
and see
you cannot
if it was the
put a
right
Docker
one.
image
And so if they're reordered, then
by
the
XYZ.
counter would
So how do you write your
not produce
applications
the
on
same
Node.js
result.
and use it?
But there's no integrity check on
So
this for
we
the whole
need
overall
someone
thing,
who
so
can
you would have to be
certify
specifically
and
looking
say,
for
here are the
the
Docker
block
images
reorderings to
you
do
can
that.
use, we support it, we stand by it, right?
Yeah.
Those things are
So modern crypto introduces things like a hashing function that has a
technologies
shared
as well
key
as
to
enterprise
determine
technologies that we
that
support.
it came
For
from the right
example,
person. Because if
PHP,
you have the
Ruby,
key and I have the
Python,
key and I
Node.js
use the key
kind of
as part
languages.
of the integrity check of what I'm
MySQL,
sending,
PostgreSQL,
then
MongoDB kind
somebody in
of
the middle
databases,
won't be able to detect
as well as
and modify
enterprise-ready
it
technologies
because
like
you'll be able to
Java EE,
say, well, this doesn't
JBoss,
match what I was expecting
or
because
for
you didn't have
integration
the
services,
hashing key.
Fuse,
So
AMQ,
basically,
or
we use
PPM,
hashing
DRMS,
functions to generate
data
a
grid,
fixed
data
size output
virtualization.
from an arbitrary input.
These
Then those
kind
are
of
easy to
enterprise-grade
connect,
technologies,
right? I don't want to do a
We
bitwise
have Docker
comparison of
images that are
4
certified for all
megabytes
these
of
things. On the
encrypted
top of
traffic.
this
I just want to say,
stack.
did
If
I
you're
end
just
up at the
using
same
Kubernetes,
result?
go and find your
But
own
the
image.
thing is, hashing
Right?
algorithms
But here, you
have
get
to
all these
be
things bundled along with
imbued with certain
the
properties. Number
technology
one,
itself that
you
supports
can't
it.
reverse a hash.
But wait
So
a second.
most
Is
information
that
theory
sufficient?
tells us that if I take a 4 megabyte file
That's
and I
where, what
produce
else
a
would you,
160-bit
right?
hash,
You
right?
need
I can't
if
reverse
you're
that.
using
So
Kubernetes,
we're good there.
big
But
set of YAML files.
you can't
How many people want to
generate
sit and
a
write
message
YAML
to
files
generate
here?
that hash either. And that's
And
where a
then
lot of
deploy
people
those
fall
YAML
down.
files?
This is the password
What
problem,
about
right?
an
Historically,
interface
we just
where
would
I
hash the
want to just
results
go click
using the
button and
crypt
deploy?
function and store them in a
I'm
file.
used to
And we did that because
a
at the
web
time
console.
it was considered
You
unfeasible to
provide me a
do
web
brute force
console.
attacks. And at
I
the
choose a
time it was.
technology and I want to
But
deploy my
very
application.
quickly that was not the case.
What I'm talking
Right?
about,
So
right?
computers got faster and the cost
Right?
of doing
Next,
a
no, I don't
crypto
want to
check
use web
or
console.
crypto
I
hash
use command line. I'm
got much
comfortable
faster
with
relative
command line.
to
I am writing
history.
my code
So
on
now,
command
pretty
line.
soon,
I
people
open
were able to
VI,
do
notepad,
dictionary
whatever. I
attacks by
save
just
my files.
hashing
Just put it
all the words in the dictionary at once. And the
category.
idiot whose
I am
password
a Java
is
developer.
umbrella,
I'm
right?
used to Eclipse.
Sorry if anybody's
I write
password.
all
No,
my
I'm not
code
sorry.
in Eclipse. I just want to click and deploy.
You know what's wrong.
Experience.
They
It
can just
matters,
blow
right?
through that, right?
User
And so
experience,
people thought,
how
okay,
much
well, let's
does
pick
it
another
influence
one,
on
right? And so we
productivity
started
of your
using
developers, right? It does.
other hashing algorithms.
So
And then we
who
used
is going to
SHA-1,
provide
and
the
then we
user
used
experience,
something
right?
else. But they're all
Red Hat comes in
fixed
again.
cost
So we
calculations.
have
Therefore,
a
as
build.
computers get faster, it's easy to blow through
I'll
them.
show
That's why
example of
we
what
use
that
things like
actually means.
bcrypt and netscrypt
Service
and PBKDF2 now, because there's a cost associated with these things that we can amp
enforcing the
up
quotas on the
over
top
time.
of
And
what you can
we
deploy,
can
like
pay the
you
price when somebody
can
logs
fix
in, but somebody who's trying
all the
to
resources, right?
blow through
The
10,000
quotas
passwords,
and
right,
resource
if it
limits,
takes 10 times
things
as
like that.
long,
All these things
they're
are
not going to be
built.
happy with that. So in this case, we are generating the hash because it's easy to generate the message. Another example of this kind of a problem, I can't remember their name, the Association for Taxis and Liveries in New York was asked for historical data. And so they, to their credit, they tried to de-identify the data. They hashed all the hack codes, we call taxi drivers hacks there.
OpenShift is not
and then they released the data, but somebody realized a hack code is a known structure. It's like some characters and some numbers, and you just try all the combinations, and they were able to then re-identify the individual drivers associated with the individual pickups, which then could be associated with known addresses, which could then be linked to paparazzi pictures, and you start to see, oh, I picked Bradley Cooper up and then took him there, and That was kind
right?
of
That's what we call open.
not good. So for our purposes, we do not want a hashing algorithm that lets us have these kinds of pre-image attacks, because that's just as good as knowing the password, right? If I just go through and blow through all the combinations, and then I find two hashes that are the same, then I know what your password is. So that's a characteristic that we want. And I also, if I'm going to use this for authentication purposes, then there can't be two different documents that yield the same hash. These collisions cause problems because I no longer can use this as a way of saying that the message came from you versus you. So hash algorithms are unbelievably complicated to design well, and they fall out of favor as well. We recently, in the last several years, identified potential collisions in SHA-1, and we said, it's going to cost this much time and money to do it. And then a couple years later, we're like, oh, no, less and less. And so we started to think SHA-1 is no longer a valid algorithm. Interestingly, SHA-1 was designed by the NSA. SHA-2 was considered safe, right? So SHA-256, until last summer, everyone was cool with. And then suddenly, in the guidance that the NSA gave for their own systems, they no longer trusted SHA-2. They said you have to use SHA-3, which they didn't design as the minimum hashing function to talk to them. So nobody really knows why. But as I said, these are interesting times to be looking into crypto. Some theories are they just found some fundamental flaw, or that we are a step closer to quantum crypto than we thought we were, and they're just covering their bases before it becomes a problem. Effectively, quantum crypto is going to rely on things that do certain operations really, really, really fast, and it'll break a lot of this historically used crypto, but cryptographers are already working on lattice structures and things like that that will be resilient to those kinds of attacks. So it's not like quite the apocalypse that everybody thinks it's going to be for cryptography when these things become, when and if these things become real. But if people don't move in that direction pretty quickly, we could have a lot of unprotected systems. So with a good hashing function and a shared hashing key, we can generate something that will help us identify who sent the message, unless the key was compromised, which we hope is not the case, and that the message has not been altered. So we can start to detect and avoid man-in-the-middle attacks by using things like that. So we have the Galois counter mode as sort of a modern interpretation of combining the characteristics of the counter mode with the authentication and integrity checks of the Galois authentication mechanism, which relies on all kinds of funky abstract algebra behind the scenes. But we have an authenticated, integrity checkable, high performance encryption mechanism. And so there are people who are not quite as keen on it, or they think that it's not quite as strong, but it's only been available for about 2 years on some platforms and less on others. So it's a fairly modern view. If we think of AES 256-bit Galois counter mode, all things being considered, right? No implementation bugs, no backdoors, nothing else. This is a pretty good, strong approach, certainly at least for protecting sessions on the internet. The other thing that you need to realize, though, is if you're trying to use this for long-term archival purposes, then what works today is not going to work 5, 10 years from now. And so you're going to have to use a completely different kind of scenario, key length, cipher suite, whatever, to protect long-term archival crypto systems. So if you know who killed Jimmy Hoffa and you put it in a file and you don't want people to find out for a while, you'll have to think 5, 10 years down the road and what that means. But for our purposes, all things being considered, this should be a pretty good approach. All right, so now we have our primitives, we've got our ways of tying them together. When we talk about symmetric encryption, we're really saying the key is the same to encrypt and decrypt. This is simple, this is fast, this is what we want to do. What's the problem?
Here, right?
Managing the key,
The
right?
whole tool
if you want to have an encrypted session with somebody, you can say, all right,
as well as being able
all right, here's the key that I'm going to use to protect, here's the key to protect the key to,
automation.
no. I'm going to DVD you, I'm going to burn out a DVD of a key and I'm going to FedEx it to you, right? Then tomorrow we can have this conversation. And every day I'll FedEx you a new
back to
DVD,
our presentation.
Right?
while this is
That's not
going
going
on,
to work, right? So we're going to solve that problem separately in a minute. But assuming that we have some way of having a good shared key, this is a very fast and efficient way of solving, doing encryption. In the 70s, the government was asked to restrict, relax some of the restrictions that were in place because U.S. corporations were going overseas. We had multinational corporations that wanted to send wire transfers and intellectual property in foreign countries that they didn't necessarily trust. And so the government reached out with the National Bureau of Standards, reached out to say, hey, we want to build a good symmetric system. And we are going to have this organization called the NSA look over our shoulders. What's interesting about this is technically the NSA didn't exist at the time. So I don't know who they thought they were fooling.
Pod is the one that gets
we don't exist, but we're gonna make sure you do the right thing.
You don't have to assign it.
So no such agency was watching over the process.
A pod
and the first round didn't yield anything interesting. The second round, IBM produced a proposal called the Lucifer Cipher.
The only reason why you would
Lucifer
container.
Don't let nerds name things. But it was based on something called the Feistel network, and it was very promising. And so they made the proposal, they handed it into the NSA. And basically, you take your plain text, you break it in half, you pass half of it through, you generate round keys from the symmetric key. Each one of these is slightly different. You do the encryption stage, you look up into what's called an S box. So if these are your inputs, then these are your outputs, if these are your inputs, then these are your outputs. It's basically a way of introducing nonlinearity into the output. And then we XOR the results, and then we swap them again, we swap them again, we have some number of rounds, and then we produce a ciphertext.
Right?
Reversing the process, you take the ciphertext, you break it in half, you reverse the round keys, and you just do everything back the other way. It was deterministic, it was predictable, it had good confusion and diffusion properties, and so they submitted it. And the NSA said, yeah, you don't need that many key bits.
Right?
And you can take this with wearing two different hats, right? You've got your tinfoil hat, and you're like,
everyone got it?
They want to break this crypto. Or maybe they're the only ones in the world who have the computation to break 56-bit
things are the actual boxes. It could be
so you can take it from a cynical perspective, or you can take it from the hat of good intentions and say, they were consulted because they knew what the hell they were doing, and back in the 70s, 56 bits of encryption was pretty solid from an engineering perspective, and you have to have a trade-off, right? 56, is that enough? Why not 1,000,000 bits? Well, that would have been slow and expensive, and nothing could have actually done anything. So, at some point, the key length would have been overkill, and you could make the case that they were just trying to find a nice engineering position.
That's the application host.
Or you could say that they knew how to break 56-bit encryption, and that was their story. We don't know. The other thing that they said was, hey, don't use those S boxes, use our S boxes. Why? Just 'cause. All right, well, that's an S box. Can anybody guess what the impact of moving some of those ones and zeros around would be? There's maybe like 3 people on the planet who'd really be able to easily tell. But IBM said, okay, right? We accepted their substitution S boxes, and DES was rolled out.
Those application components that
now they claim no
actual
involvement, but this guy Thomas Johnson has written a book about the history of cryptography during the Cold War, and they claim no, they hired Walter Tuchman in, gave him clearance, and worked on it with him. I don't know, right? I don't know the exact level of involvement, but we do know that shortly after this, in the 80s, there started to be concern about something called differential cryptanalysis. It's kind of a known plaintext, differential input plaintext attack that had the potential to affect block ciphers, stream ciphers, hashing functions, and the people who discovered this were kind of freaking out a little bit. And there became concerns that DES had been weakened to make it susceptible to these kinds of attacks. And so everyone wearing tinfoil hats were like, oh, those damn NSA people, they broke DES. And this went on for a while until in the 90s, the original DES team wrote a paper that said, relax, We knew about differential cryptanalysis. We just didn't want to draw attention to it because we weren't sure what else would be broken. The S boxes that we gave you were actually strengthened against differential crypto attacks, not weakened. Oh, okay. Thanks. So it seems like to that level, right, they did actually do what they were asked to do, which was to consult and produce a good quality algorithm. On its own, DES has sort of stood the test of time, with the exception of key length.
Service, which is
so when it was first produced, it was estimated that it would cost $20 million to do a brute force attack and do a key recovery on DES. A couple years later, they're like, maybe $1 million. In the mid-90s, the EFF and a company in San Francisco did it for $250,000 on custom FPGA hardware, and they were able to recover a key in tens of hours. I don't remember exactly what it was. And within a couple of years of that, commodity hardware worth $10,000 or so, you could do the same thing. So this caused a problem because everyone was using this at the time, everybody depended on it, and we didn't have another solution. So very quickly, people proposed the use of triple DES, like do DES 3 times with 3 keys, and you could have an effective key length of 168 bits, but not everything could support 3 keys, so it was designed to use the same. If you use the same key for all 3 steps, it was like encrypt, decrypt, encrypt again, like you just did it one time. So it was a good stopgap measure, right? And we ended up with an effective key length of 112 bits, which gave us time to go design something else. It was just really slow. For the most part, I think we've gotten rid of most triple DES engines, but I think there may be some financial systems that still use it. In the interim, we had the design and implementation of the Advanced Encryption Standard, which was designed. Now, National Bureau of Standard had become National Institute of Standard and Technology. The No Such Agency had become the National Security Agency. They were out and proud. They, advertised in college campuses to find smart people, and they decided this was going to be an open process, right? We're going to have mathematicians, physicists, all kinds of people involved in looking at this problem, and they wanted people not to be concerned about recommendations and whatnot. So they had submissions from all over the world. Eventually, the Rindahl engine was chosen. It's a portmanteau of the names of the authors of the design. And they wanted not just a good crypto system, but something that would work well in different environments. So notebook computers, and we didn't necessarily have the kind of cell phone infrastructure that we do now, but they knew that smaller profile devices would be coming, and we'd want to have something that didn't take tremendous amounts of energy or memory or disk space or whatever. Because you can create things that are really, really strong from a crypto perspective, but just painful from a cost or engineering perspective.
And the service itself exposes a port.
So Rindahl was chosen in 2000. It was accepted as part of FIPS 197, which if you haven't done any government procurement stuff,
it doesn't matter.
Consider yourself lucky. But this means it's acceptable for use in federal information processing systems. Right? So this has now been blessed. And one of the interesting things was the crypto community said, hey, this is cool. Right? We enjoyed this process. We feel comfortable with it. Kirchhoff's principle tells us, we can put trust in an encryption system that is completely open. If everybody knows all about it and why the decisions were made, if the only thing you don't know is the key, then and you can't draw connections between plain text and ciphertext, then that's a good crypto system. So we were pretty happy. AES, I'm not going to go through the actual implementation details, but it's a new set of structures. You pick different key lengths. The number of key lengths generates, picks the number of rounds. But you can see in the steps, we have substitute bytes, shift rows, mix columns, add round keys. You can just sort of feel the confusion and diffusion sort of being baked into the system, which is what it's designed to do. But it stood up fairly well, and since then, there are some side channel attacks I'll talk about in a little bit, but we're still pretty happy 16 years later. And interestingly, to thwart some of the concern, the government has said 256-bit AES can be used for up to top secret clearance stuff. Right? So they're eating their own dog food. They're not designing something that they're going to undercut.
One part here.
Because they're using it as well. So to solve the key problem of symmetric key encryption, we rely on something called asymmetric encryption generally, where there are 2 keys, right? And we use one key to encrypt and one key to decrypt. And so people sort of theorized about this before we actually had any real implementations, because there has to be some kind of connection between the keys that don't lend themselves well to discovering the other half if you know one part of it, right? So RSA was the first commercial asymmetric encryption system, but I want to talk about Diffie-Helman, which is a technique that was, RSA is based on the factorization of large primes. Diffie-Helman is based upon the difficulty of breaking the discrete logarithm problem. So this was first published in 1976, but several years later the British were like, yeah, we knew about that. Thanks. Special relationship, my butt. But it basically allowed us to derive a shared key over untrusted channels. And it did so by relying on the difficulty of reversing the discrete logarithm problem. You know, there's just no good, efficient way of reversing this process for elements of various groups. So, you know, the math looks something like this. That is hard to do, right, to reverse the process. But for certain groups, if I know one part of the calculation and you know one part of the calculation, they form what is called an equivalence class for certain modular math for large prime numbers. So we can come to the same answer even if we don't send over the exact details by relying on the structure of this group definition. Code, right? Now, much more friendly at the end of the day, Wikipedia very kindly has this metaphor. If Alice and Bob want to share a key, then they pick a starting point, right? And that starting point is a certain color. And so Alice will mix in her secret color and Bob will mix in his secret color. They will generate a partial result, which they can then exchange over the network. Then Alice will mix in her secret color, Bob mixes in his secret color, and they end up at a common place, right? And that becomes the shared key that they can then use for symmetric encryption, which is much faster. So asymmetric encryption is useful over untrusted channels, but it's terrible from a performance perspective. It does weird things to the size of what's there. There are limits to what you can encrypt, the lengths of things that you can encrypt successfully with it. So we use this as a bootstrap mechanism to be able to generate symmetric key encryption. And so that's why we use this for SSH, we use this for transport level security, we use this for IPsec and a bunch of other things. So this has enabled all of this cloud hoo-ha that everybody's excited about, and the ability to do remote DevOps and these sorts of things, because we have the ability to have shared connections, or secured connections in somewhat arbitrary ways. We can generate keys and install them, so we don't need passwords, but we can also use different techniques for generating the symmetric key. So the world that we know it, as we know it in the technology space, is largely made possible from technologies like this. So we're in a pretty good place, right? We've got AES, it's well designed, people like it, the government's using it, we've got a solution to our asymmetric key problem.
The previous version is gone, and a new version
not so much.
Getting deployed.
Number one, like in the year 2014, every major implementation of TLS had a 0-day associated with it. Right? We had the Apple Secure Transport problem, which had a triple handshake attack that it was susceptible to. The GNU TLS had a bad certificate validation problem and a man-in-the-middle attack that it was susceptible to. Our good friend Heartbleed in OpenSSL. The NSS signature forgery flaw based on parsing AS11 data structures, right? These are decisions that were made 30 years ago in terms of how to structure and share information in machine processable ways. And a flaw in parsing something that old yielded the ability to forge signatures, which is kind of a problem. And then Microsoft's S channel was completely borked for a while as well. So this was my original motivation for having this talk. It doesn't matter how well something is designed if the code that we run on is crappy, right? And so, like anything, you have no security if you have crappy code. So code quality is sort of job one for attempting to build secure systems. And that's one of the cool things about what Aaron Bedra just showed as far as this formal verification stuff is tools like Cryptol allow us to verify the protocols, and then allow us to generate and find problems in some of the implementations of these things as well. And that's going to become increasingly important to avoid these problems being there in the first place. The OpenSSL Heartbleed problem, though, is slightly problematic. Right, this is an open source project, right? We discovered a problem and fixed it, but we also can track back to where it came from, and it was attached to a buffer overflow that a German dude checked in on New Year's Eve.
This is the Docker registry from which the image gets
and
gets deployed.
Was he drunk? You know, right? I don't know. He claims it was a mistake, but it went through a secure validation, right? Somebody checked the code and missed a buffer overflow. So
now,
here's the scenario that we find ourselves in, right? Either this whole notion of with many eyes all bugs are shallow is complete crap.
For example, if I want to scale up,
or maybe it wasn't intentional, or it wasn't an accident.
4 or 5 instances, right?
We don't know. He claims it wasn't, but we have been led to believe since then that the government has known about it for a while and left it in there because they like using it. It's easier to break into servers and steal keys than it is to do brute force attacks on crypto. So we all were still vulnerable because we have monocultures in large parts of our internet infrastructure because that problem was left unfixed for 2 or 3 years. That's a little troubling, right? So what else do people know about that they're not
scaling up or increasing
then the other half of software security problems, bugs are one part of it, design flaws are the other. So we have attacks like Beast, Crime, and Breach that affect earlier versions of TLS that have been fixed, but you have to use a browser that supports the fixed version before you get the protection benefit.
We don't have time for that.
And so here's where it starts to become a bit of a, teeth-pulling exercise with a lot of our customers.
Limitations
if a design flaw is found in a protocol like this, we generally assume that it's going to take about 4 to 6 years to fix the problem. We've got to fix the design, we've got to have implementations, we've got to test the implementations, and then we have to roll it out, and then we have to let other people, sort of encourage other people to update to the new version. And these things take a long time. So now it's not a question of like, oh, well, my customer wants to use old browsers. Now it's become, what is this doing to us? What is the risk profile that supporting these things does for us? We've got timing attacks like Lucky 13. We've got POODLE, which has the mouthful but legitimate name of padding Oracle on downgraded legacy encryption. So between Heartbleed and POODLE, I think all new attacks have to have catchy names and logos and probably sponsorship opportunities and things like that. But the idea here is, even if the browser is being used correctly, if a late model browser that supports TLS 1.2 is being used, if I can simulate a network failure during the negotiation process, the browser tries to do the right thing, is tricked into thinking that didn't work, so it tries TLS 1.1, TLS 1.0, settles on SSL 3, and then we stop trying to simulate failure, and we then use SSL 3. The problem there is SSL 3 is broken. The combination of Cipher block chaining and not specifying the padding structure of SSL 3 leads a relatively straightforward attack for recovering bytes of the plain text, including cookies and things like that. So this becomes difficult, right? So we've knocked out the design, the bugs, we've knocked out the design flaws in late model versions of browsers, but if we allow the browser to downgrade to these other broken protocols, then this still becomes the type of attack that we have to deal with. So design problems can't be easily patched. They have to be fixed in design and then
bring up the new version.
So the only real solution that we had for a while, I think there's some other ones that have come up since then, was just you have to remove SSL 3 support from your browser and your server.
Do it in a way where I don't have to sit in the night to do it.
I didn't do that for a while.
So what you do in blue-green model is, rather than bringing down the application instance, you create 2 different instances.
It's kind of hard to see on this screen.
The first instance is left running.
Daniel Bernstein generated some examples of timing variance in the use of AES for certain inputs. And so we have red, green, and blue dots representing different times in the processing of the input into ciphertext. And this is a problem because timing variance is a way of building up a statistical model about the key space and the ciphertext space. So this opens us up to doing certain kinds of attacks. So this is called a side channel attack. I'm not directly attacking the implementation, but I'm using sort of things that I can learn, like timing variance and power consumption,
you can switch over to the new version
as ways of
version,
reducing the amount of time that I would have to do for a brute force attack. And so the trick is to use constant time operations. And so again, you can't really see this, but they're all the same color and shape now. Now we're no longer we're no longer leaking details. So holy crap, right? Timing calculations and power consumption are ways of people attacking these things that we're using.
To the database schema, you cannot switch from
Yeah.
old version to
Yeah.
new.
I mean, again, it's non-trivial, but you have to assume
Two different versions of the database.
if we can describe it, you know,
to make data
somebody knows how to do it somewhere, right?
Has to go back to the older database
Now,
as well.
then there's the problem.
Only then it will work.
This is a particular
in general,
Twitter stream from a guy from the company hacking team.
Multiple deployments where
they were not very popular. People called them the enemies of the internet. They were accused of doing business with unfriendly regimes that like to steal their citizens' rights. They denied all of it, and then a huge hack dump of hundreds of gigabytes of source code and emails and things like that last summer pretty much showed that they were lying, that they were actually doing these things, and they essentially went out of business. But the problem what's going on here is these people knew what they were doing, right? They were writing hardcore, you know, privacy, freedom stealing tools, and yet when their crap was stolen, so were their private keys. So they knew what they were doing. They used, you know, good infrastructure. They encrypted their stuff, but a key compromise led to the ability to decrypt everything that that key had ever been used for. And so this is where we find ourselves with a lot of the legacy crypto systems that we have. Symmetric key encryption does not survive key compromise well as it's implemented in many places. So modern crypto systems are starting to design in things like forward secrecy, where a key compromise cannot be used against sort of legacy traffic and whatnot. So even as good as I got us, that's technology that was sort of interesting 5-10 years ago, and everyone's moving on into ephemeral keys and elliptical curves and things like that for moving forward. So then there's this problem of how most people have implemented Diffie-Helman key exchange. If you go to weakdh.org, you can read about the logjam attack and the fact that everyone is using, not everyone, but a lot of people are using the same prime number, and it's a 512-bit prime number in their implementations of their code, because people thought that the attack for the group that was associated with that prime was still sufficiently hard that it wasn't going to matter if everyone used the same prime number. So again, baked into the source code is the prime number that people are using, and what it ended up doing is allowing people with sufficient resources to, and this is all documented here, and these people have demonstrated the attack. There are basically 4 computationally intensive steps in this process. If you use this prime number that everybody did, you can spend about a week calculating one result, and then it takes about a minute to crack somebody who's actually using it, right? So that becomes a pretty easy way to backdoor lots and lots and lots of internet traffic. It's not all, but depending on the tools and how they're configured and how they're being used, you can find the details there. So that's unfortunate in terms of our trust we can put in encryption. And then there's Edward Snowden. I don't really care what you think about him, right? I don't care whether you think he's a traitor or a patriot. We can't unlearn what we've learned. And what we've learned is that there seems to have been a fairly rigorous attempt by the US government to break crypto. Now, you can put on the hat of good intention, right? They were doing this because they think it's their job to do this, but in the process, it seems like we're being left in the cold as far as people trusting the crypto that we're trying to use. So BULLRUN was one of the projects that were revealed, and they indicated, you know, the government likes to break into computers and rely on things like Heartbleed to steal keys. But they also apparently like to influence policies and standards so that they become backdoorable. Now that's difficult to do when you have a lot of really, really, really smart people in the room watching what you're doing to slip in like, let's divide by 2, you know, something that would be easily detected. So what we actually see is apparently they have been quite clever about doing this. They've relied on things like the logjam attack. They've relied on things like the ability to backdoor the random number generator that's being used for a lot of modern crypto. How do you go about doing something like that? Well, the theory, again, not all of this has been proven, but you know, enough questions have been asked that people are concerned about it. There's a random number generator called dual EC DRBG that was somewhat quickly pushed through the standards process. Uncharacteristically so. These are generally fairly conservative processes, and this one kind of got rammed through. And back in 2007, sort of pre-Snowden, people were concerned about the potential for this thing to be backdoored. But, you know, these are tinfoil hat-wearing people, and nobody really pays attention. But there's a required support of this dual EC DRBG for FIPS 140-2, which you could read as a way of using leverage to get it supported everywhere, right? Companies want to sell to the government, they have to support these things. This gets the support for this random number generator dispersed. And there were implications specifically in the documentation that dual ECDBG was one of the compromised standards. Now, the NIS, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, after this went, yeah, maybe you shouldn't use that.
The schema has when you move from the old version to new version.
Break random number generator, then it doesn't matter what else you do. What this appears to have happened was, because in one case, RSA apparently took $10 million to make dual ECDRBG the default random number generator. Now that it's been supported by everybody who needs FIPS 140-2 certification, this forces it to be the default random number generator used by commercial crypto systems, and that makes it available, accessible, right? Go to dualec.org, you can see exactly how this thing can be backdoored. Whether it was intentionally designed to be so or not, we don't know. But this all starts to make us feel a little icky because we're trying to put our trust in these things. So that's one problem, but that's not going to solve the open source problem, right? This is commercial crypto. Companies can get bought off and take money to do things. But how do we attack the open source people? Right? They're not going to be paid off, and even if somebody was, somebody else will find it in the GitHub repos and whatnot. Well, there's a new instruction set for generating random numbers on chip in Intel's hardware that has been available for a while. It's compliant with these various standards. But Linux kernel hackers apparently received rather strong arm twisting by Intel engineers to get them to base the entropy in dev-random on this single operation on Intel chipsets.
Switch over to that project.
And that's kind of hard to justify, right, without more details. But basically, relying solely on the hardware random number generator, which is using an implementation sealed inside a chip, which is impossible to audit, is a bad idea.
Some customization.
So it seems this was part of the strategy, right? So force people to use defaults, backdoorable random number generators to break the crypto. Even if you're using AES, which as an algorithm is good, right? If the random number generation is broken, then I have ways around it. So even the fact that the government is using it to eat their own dog food doesn't really mean anything if they have ways of undermining it. They're just not going to undermine it for themselves, right? So this is the problem that we face.
Not have access to pods running in project
now,
2 or services in project 2.
They isn't the only place that Linux gets its entropy. But other companies and organizations have moved away, basing their random number generation support on things like Yarrow. But now it's hard not to feel this way if you're paying attention, right? It's hard not to feel like this infrastructure that we're putting our trust in to protect us against terrorists, to protect us against industrial espionage, against organized crime, against script hackers and other
rel boxes
script
with
kiddies and other
OpenShift
things.
installed on the top of it, which means
we're
when I
really
say
not sure
OpenShift, it
who to
includes
trust
Docker,
anymore or
it
what to put our
includes
trust
Kubernetes,
in.
and all the
I
stuff that
think
is
the
involved,
math
right?
still works, right?
So, yes,
Trust the math.
there is a scheduler.
Schneier says, but you need to pay
where
attention
this portion,
to
based
what's
on a policy
happening
that you
very,
can
very
do.
closely, right? You need to have people who are paying attention to
Set up-
these sorts of things.
Let's say you have
And so what we have
500
now
nodes,
is the government
right?
trying to put these backdoors in,
200 of them are in rack 1.
but only the good people will
200
be able
of
to
them-
use them. We won't let the bad people use them. And this is called magical thinking. As an example of what we will face 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now, let's talk about an attack that we discovered in the last year called Freak, the factoring RSA export keys. As we said back in the day, these things were export controlled. You could not distribute client application libraries that understood or did the strong crypto. They would ask for export controlled certificates. This is true even for Java. This is a state machine kind of attack that's at play. But because we had these legacy export controls, export versions of clients could be susceptible. And there's a theoretical man-in-the-middle attack that vulnerable clients and vulnerable servers could be taken advantage of. And when I say theoretical, we have a proof of concept. So just because something can be proof of concepted, though, doesn't mean it's a real issue. And this should, in theory, not be a real issue, because modern clients don't ask for the Cipher suite, the export-controlled Cipher suites. And even if they did, what servers still support them? And even if you do have a vulnerable client and a vulnerable server, this would still require factoring of a 512-bit RSA key or a 40-bit symmetric cipher, which is non-trivial. It's not the end of the world, but it's non-trivial. So why am I ending with this? Because a man-in-the-middle attack against this request, the client can say, give me your strong certificate. The man-in-the-middle attack could say, I'll take a weak certificate. And because of a bug in OpenSSL in the secure transport client libraries, they accepted an export-controlled certificate back even though they didn't ask for one. Right? That should have been rejected. Like, what is this crap? I don't want this. So that's a problem. Then the RSA modulus has to be factored, but a security researcher set up a factoring RSA modulus in the cloud as a service, right? And for $100, these researchers were able to recover the key in 7 hours. Okay, but Brian, 7 hours is too long for most internet sessions, right? Yeah, except mod SSL only generated the RSA key once when the server comes up. So as long as that server's up, if you are able to factor the key in 7 hours, you can own that server. And various organizations like the NSA career site were susceptible to this attack. So they did a proof of concept where the certificate still looks valid, but the text has been changed to say, this is not the page you think it is. Yes, it has the right certificate. Do you really want a job here? But if we take a random sampling of other servers, we see that, Groupon, Business Insider, tinyurl.com, Kohl's.com, jcpenney.com, zdnet.com, Cornell, LG, Motorola, the SEC, Pearson were all vulnerable servers. And this is just a random sampling, right? There were lots of other ones. Then we have OpenSSL before a certain version, Boring SSL before a certain version, Libre SSL before a certain version, Secure Transport, S-Channel, Mono, IBM's JSSE. All versions of JSSE were broken because they didn't enforce state change transitions in SSL until about January of last year. So that means Safari was broken, Chrome was broken on OS X and Android browser was broken, Opera was broken, BlackBerry's browser was broken, and all versions of Windows. So something that should not have been a thing was a thing through a combination of bugs and the fact that we used export-controlled cryptography 20 years ago. So if we allow backdoors that only the good guys will use, I guarantee you we're going to be facing these problems 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years from now. Because that's the way it works. So if you have good choices, if you have people who know what they're doing in making good choices, if you have an awareness of what's being considered broken and what isn't being considered broken, I think you can stay ahead of this. but it takes effort, right? So you need to have people who know what they're doing. Bruce Schneier's Applied Cryptography book just was released. Its 20th anniversary. It's a rather accessible, comprehensive journey through a lot of these ideas, but this is not the kind of thing that your average developer is going to read. Somebody in your organization has to understand these things, but the average developer is not. I would say make your average developers read this book. Ivan Reichdick's Bulletproof SSL and TLS. It's very accessible. It talks about the designs, the attacks. He keeps the digital version up to date. So as new attacks come out, he will modify relevant chapters and include them, and how does this differ from other sorts of things. So this is the kind of thing that I think anybody who touches SSL should probably understand what's going on here. If you're interested in the more theoretical side of this, Understanding Cryptography, a textbook for students and practitioners, is one of the more accessible theoretical crypto books I've seen. That's a fairly low bar to clear, but you can see it's targeting students and practitioners, not postdocs or something like that. So this is something that most people in here can work through. It'll take some time, but I think it'll help you understand the various components and how they combine. And if you are interested in the mathematical side of this, An Introduction to Mathematical Cryptography, also from Springer, is a relatively accessible book.
Created another service called Service AB.
Sorry to end on kind of a down note, but math still works. Trust the math. Just stay on top of things. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed your time with us here at DevNexus. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any questions too.